eagle to the sea. Fly like an eagle, let my spirit carry me. I want to fly like an eagle till I'm free.
Hello students and staff of Clover High School, this is Mr. Ruth. I'm going to take just a few moments today to go through our student handbook. We will not go word for word through every element, but you are responsible for all the contents within the student handbook. It's published online. You can see the contents there. And so while we may not go over every single word, you are responsible for the words in the student handbook. The first few pages of the student handbook are really informational. It lists our school administrators, school counselors, our schedule. A portion of this is our mission statement, which is expect excellence and be excellence, and we'll talk about that a lot throughout the year. We begin our discussion on page 7 with a list of what do I do if, and among those are what do I do if I'm late to school. Students who arrive to school after 8:35 must report to the attendance office and get a pass for first period admittance. So it's very important to be at school on time. If you miss school and you need to get missing assignments, the first step is to obtain assignments from the teacher's Canvas page or email the teacher. Otherwise, request assignments should be made by calling the school office. A 24-hour turnaround time is needed for assignments requested through the office. What do I do if I need to leave school early? Students cannot leave school grounds without permission from the office. A student requesting early dismissal should bring a note from a parent or guardian stating the time and reason for dismissal. The note should be delivered to the attendance office prior to the start of school. A student may be signed out by authorized adults. Only people who are listed in our database as authorized adults may sign a student out of school. Now, what do I do if I need to ride a different bus? We have some overcrowding on buses, so requests to ride a different bus or to ride home with a friend on the bus will be denied. What do I do if I'm having trouble with a student? The first step is to keep your cool. Any problem should be taken to your teacher, who will determine the next step. The next step may be a visit to a counselor or an assistant principal. What if you want to bring a visitor to school? Visitors such as friends or family from out of town cannot come to school with you. Liability and instructional issues prevent our ability to accommodate these requests. Let's talk about what you need to do if you want to bring medicine to school. If you need to bring a prescription, non-prescription, or over-the-counter medicine, you'll need a note from your parents, and the medicine must be in the original container. All prescription medicine must be turned into the school nurse at the beginning of the school day. There's more information about that in the student handbook. Let's talk a little bit about attendance regulations. If a student accrues 3 unlawful absences in a row or 5 total unlawful absences within a school year, the student is considered truant, and the school will initiate an attendance intervention plan. There's a lot of confusion about this and about how many days you can miss, but you can fall within the realms of truancy if you have those 3 unlawful absences in a row or 5 total. So please pay attention to your attendance. The school year consists of 180 days, and so students, if you go over your allotted number of days, you are subject to losing credit in those courses. So it's very important that you pay attention once again to your attendance. Earlier in the video, we mentioned that siblings, friends, or students from other schools will not be allowed to visit classrooms. Let's talk about some other potential disruptions. Teachers and students will not be called out of classes unless an emergency exists. Articles and messages to be delivered to teachers and students must be left at the office. The office staff will see that they're delivered with a minimum amount of class interruption. So every now and then we have issues where balloons or flowers or mainly food will be left in the main office, and we want to get away from that. We don't want to text mom or dad and say, please bring something up to the main office for me to pick up. We want to move away from having those deliveries go on during the school day. We now transition somewhat into a conversation about extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities. Your student handbook is a great resource to look at things like eligibility and involvement in extracurricular activities. One thing I would like to point out, students who participate in extracurricular activities are held to a higher standard than regular students as they represent the school in a very public way. Athletic department and team rules expectations may exceed those in the student handbook. These additional expectations will be shared by the athletic director, head coach, or group sponsor prior to the start of a season or a group activity. Along those same lines, this is a reminder that students traveling with groups will be under the jurisdiction of the school and must abide by the same rules of conduct and discipline which apply at school. Students going on trips must have written permission. Students who will miss classes due to a field trip must check with their teachers prior to the trip to receive homework, classwork, and due dates. If a due date for assigned work falls on a date of absence because of a field trip, the due date shall become the last day of class prior to the field trip departure. So it's very important to take care of business beforehand. This next section on page 21 is actually under food services or discussions about the cafeteria, but I want to draw your attention to it. It says students are not allowed to leave campus at any time during the school day or during lunch. And so the notion of signing out for lunch, again, we want to move away from that in order to protect our instructional time. We now make a quick transition to a discussion on textbooks. Students must turn in the specific book they are assigned each semester, or they will be responsible for full replacement costs as determined by the state depository. So again, if you are missing a textbook, something's going on with your textbook, or you have questions about textbooks, you need to see Ms. Weber about that. Report cards will be held at the end of the school year if all textbooks issued have not been returned and form signed for said return. So please keep up with your textbooks. The next section of the student handbook provides great information about technologies and MacBook Air. Now there is the acceptable use policy, and there are some of the ramifications or consequences if you don't follow that policy. But one thing I want to draw your eyes to deal with off-campus conduct. Students, parents, legal guardians, teachers, and staff members should be aware that the district may take disciplinary action for conduct initiated and or created off-campus involving the inappropriate use of the internet or web-based resources. And so a lot of times we know that on campus the things that we're doing with our MacBooks are under the jurisdiction of the school. Sometimes we don't realize that off campus the same applies. Of course, this discussion brings us into the use of social media and email, and just be aware that that again is under the jurisdiction of the school district. So if you're using social media or email inappropriately, that falls within the same guidelines. Page 27 has some great practical advice as it relates to safeguarding personal property. Every year we have a report that perhaps something was lost or can't be located as it relates to a PE dressing room or locker room. And so we want to be careful that we don't leave things in unattended areas, and particularly in PE dressing rooms, that we're not leaving large amounts of cash or expensive jewelry or electronic devices out. We want to make sure those items are secure. We now move on to a discussion about driving to school, and a few points I want to hit here. Any student that has their parking privilege revoked will not get a refund, and also driving to school is a privilege, and so it can be suspended or revoked if you're not following the rules as it relates to driving to school. You'll see here there's also a waiver of search that says that if we need to search vehicles, which from time to time we do, we have the authority to do so. Along those same lines as it relates to searches, you'll see an area here on page 33 where it tells you, in an effort to maintain the safest possible environment, the school will act pursuant to state law, which says that persons entering school property are deemed to have consented to search of their person and property. This is for all folks that enter school. Property can include book bags, purses, lockers, electronic devices, and vehicles. And we reserve the right to videotape public areas within the school property. And so from time to time we may need to conduct a search, and this search could include electronic devices such as your MacBook or phone. And you will have to cooperate as we conduct those searches. Hopefully you won't have to be a part of any of those things, but state law does give us the right. We now move into the Clover High School Code of Conduct, and you'll see here there's a caveat that says the school reserves the right to adopt, adjust, or create consequences within the guidelines of school board policy as necessary to handle discipline situations. Of course, things are constantly changing in schools and in society in general, and so we have to be able to adjust with those. And so the school reserves the right to be able to do that. The rules are effective during the following times and places: on school grounds before, during, and after school hours; on the school grounds at any other time when the school is being used by a group; off the school grounds at any school activity, function, or event, or en route to and from school on a school bus or other school vehicle, and at the school bus stop. And again, each member of the staff of Clover School District Number 2 has the authority and responsibility to correct any student at any time and at any and all school functions. So the next pages that you'll see the different types of conduct that we have to monitor within schools, and you'll see different levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3 types of conduct, and the appropriate responses to those types of conduct. A particular type of conduct that we will not tolerate at Clover High School is bullying. And you'll see on page 39 that bullying is defined, and recommendations are also given for students who may feel they have been harassed or bullied. There are also consequences that are listed there, and it's a variety of consequences. It's not necessarily in an order. It could be that many of these consequences come along with bullying. And so we're going to investigate those thoroughly, because that is not an atmosphere or a culture that we want to find acceptable at Clover High School. Page 40 goes into detail about board policy as it relates to alcohol and drugs. And you'll see some penalties there as it relates to possession, sale or distribution, or use of these substances. And you can see here as well that there are elements that talk about sale, distribution, use, and about how use or coming to school under the influence does not have to happen on school grounds. So if a student makes a negative decision as it relates to alcohol or drugs off school ground and report to school, it's within our jurisdiction to discipline those students, as it relates to our policy. Page 41 provides some information about weapons on campus, and this is in a very important section, and so you'll want to read through it thoroughly. It gives a list of weapons and board policy, which acts very swiftly as it relates to weapons. And so this is knowingly or unknowingly. You want to be very careful here. You want to know all the contents of jackets, book bags, and vehicles as it relates to weapons. And so you don't want to have something in your vehicle perhaps from the weekend and have it left over in a vehicle, in a book bag, in a jacket. You want to make sure that you know the contents of all of those areas, because we must deal with any infractions dealing with weapons in a very serious manner. There are 2 points on page 42 I'd like to go into detail with, and they are violence or threats toward a staff member or toward other students. And this is very serious, as sometimes as students may get frustrated and may say things out of anger, but we have to know that our words mean something and they come with consequences. And so we deal with that very swiftly as well. You may be frustrated with someone and say something inappropriate and then not realize that the consequences are going to be much higher than you may think. And sometimes that frustration may result in fighting. And we want to stay away from that as well, because the chances are you're going to be arrested as a result of this. And so it details on this page what fighting is, and if you do not walk away from a fight, then you become a willing participant in that fight and you're subject to disciplinary action. So we know the 2 individuals involved in the fight obviously face some consequence. What you may not understand is that promoting, instigating, videoing, crowding around, cheering on a fight will not be tolerated. And you can be punished the same way as those who were involved directly in the fight. And of course, law enforcement will be involved anytime we have something like that going on campus. I'm going to encourage you strongly to not be involved in anything involving fighting, whether it's fighting itself or promoting fighting or videoing anything that has to do with fighting. We'll talk very briefly about inappropriate language Sometimes we get so desensitized by the things that we see, perhaps even within culture, that the language that we use sometimes slips out at the wrong time. Sometimes it's out of frustration in a classroom, or sometimes it's out of frustration with dealing with other students. Just know that we cannot use that as an excuse to use inappropriate language, because sometimes, again, the consequences are going to be a little bit higher than you may think. And if you had time to think about using that language beforehand, perhaps you'd stop yourself. So let's make sure we do that. All right, let's spend just a little bit of time on the dress code. And so I'm going to read this off to you. The required length of shorts, skirts, or dresses for students is that they must extend to the fingertips. Holes in clothing above the fingertips will not be allowed. Exposed undergarments will not be allowed. No spaghetti straps, off the shoulder, or see-through clothing will be allowed. Tops are not to be cut so low as to expose cleavage, or so short as to expose midriffs or lower backs at any point during students' movement. Pants for all students must be worn above the hips. Pants cannot drag the floor, nor be adorned with metal or plastic chains, handcuffs, or other accessories. Trench coats are not allowed to be worn on campus at any school function. Hats, sweatbands, or other coverings are prohibited, like bandanas. And so I know this is a big topic throughout schools throughout the country. And so we just ask at Clover High School that we know the dress code and that we follow the dress code. And there are suggestions there in order to test the dress code so that you'll know that you're in compliance. One thing that we see a good bit of are hats around campus. And so we don't want to have to tell you to take your hat off constantly. So it's easier just not to have the temptation of having your hat at school. If you don't have the hat at school, then you don't have to worry about us telling you to take it off constantly. So there's lots of information in here as it relates to the dress code. Please be sure that you know this information and that you follow this as well. Let's talk for a moment about cutting class or being late to class. And this is not a discipline issue. This is an instructional issue, because when you're not in class, your instruction suffers. Not the instruction delivered to you, but the instruction you receive because you're not there to receive it. You may have seen more folks in the hallways at the beginning of this school year, and we're going to keep that going because we've upped the punishment as it relates to being tardy to class. So make sure that you look at that, because it has changed slightly. Some things that have changed is when you're tardy to class, you're going to go straight to class, and your teacher is going to mark you tardy when you get there. This applies to all classes except for first block. When you first get there at the beginning of the day, you'll still have to get a pass from the main office if you're tardy. But any other class, you're going to go straight into the classroom, and your teacher is going to mark you tardy, and you can see that the punishments have gone up with that. Now, we don't want anyone to be given a discipline referral for being tardy to class, and that's why we're sweeping the hallways to make sure you get there on time. And so it's very important that you're not walking from place to place, but really you're just walking from your last class to your next class. Be sure you're on time. We are going to cut down on tardies by a good bit this year, and we need your help in doing so, because that is going to affect our instruction. Be sure you get to class on time, because if you're not, again, the consequences are going to come a little quicker than they have in the past. Our next section deals with the honor code, or basically cheating, or doing work that is copied from someone else, or taking credit for work that is not your own. And so I just want to briefly remind folks that there are consequences associated with violating the honor code, and it's not just for the person who's copying, but for the person who's providing the work in order to copy. And so we know we have very strong friendships throughout our school, and that's a great thing, but don't allow that friendship or you trying to help someone out to get you into trouble as well. And so we want to work very hard to make sure that we follow the honor code, and we're not getting credit for work that is not our own. And so be sure to look over this section if you have any questions. Cell phones should not be used during instructional time unless given permission by the teacher. But as it relates to cell phones, students will not normally get in trouble for having their cell phone out in class. It's usually when the teacher asks for that cell phone, because you'll see that the first offense requires the device to be confiscated and returned to the student at the end of the school day by the teacher. So when a teacher asks you for your cell phone, that type violation is so much smaller than you refusing to give up your cell phone, an administrator being called down to the classroom, and the level of discipline going up considerably. So we want to move away from that. You need to be compliant because the discipline is a lot less if you just give that cell phone over if you're found in violation. A distinction you may notice this year in comparison to past years is that students may not have headphones or earbuds on in the hallway. We did a lot of security training over the summer and noticed the danger in having students transition to class with earbuds or headphones on. So it's very important to not have those on, and you'll hear lots of people ask you to please take your headphones off, take your earbuds out. Make sure you don't have them on during transition to class. Page 54 is at the back of the student handbook and deals with flex time, and we'll have more discussions about flex time as that date gets closer. But flex time is a designated 30-minute time increment in the school day that allows you to make some decisions about areas you may need extra help at school. And so there'll be tons of information that will come out about that over the next couple of weeks, but I just wanted to point you to that area of the student handbook if you have questions about flex time, and many of those questions will be answered soon. Students, I'm aware that a lot of the information that we went over today dealt with policy, procedures, rules, really just a long list of things. Hey, students, don't do this stuff. And I know that comes across as relatively negative, but I don't want it to be seen that way at all. Our students do an amazing job of keeping Blue Eagle Nation running. Our teachers are unbelievable, our staff. It's just a great team that we have at Clover High School. And so students, I make mention of these things because they're the parameters that sometimes help ensure our greatness. You as students are what really bring us to the next level, and the combination of our students, staff, parents, community make Clover such a special place. So I know we've gone over a lot today as it relates to rules, but I'm so happy to say that the majority of our students here do such a tremendous job maximizing their potential. So looking forward to a great year, Blue Eagle Nation.